Coming up on In the Life, a look at the origins of gay theater.
The Cafe Cino was a place where people could come and be themselves.
A conversation with Edmund White and Doric Wilson.
With Stonewall, we started coming out in the daylight.
Not Twilight people anymore.
And remembering the boys in the band.
What this piece of work did was that it created a dialogue about homosexuality.
All this and more on In the Life.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation, Arcus Foundation, New Paul Foundation, the estate of Richard W. Weiland, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.
Welcome to In the Life. I'm Michael Billy. The days and months following Stonewall galvanized a movement for LGBT civil rights. But the expression of LGBT art and culture has always existed and inspired people. Tonight, we reflect on the role art and culture plays in shaping our community's movement. Art has always been a means for people to express and dramatize their lives, the way they are and the way they want them to be. In the late 1950s and early 60s, Greenwich Village was a haven for outcasts and artists seeking self-expression. It was during this vibrant period that gay theater was born at fabulous and virtually hidden little places like Cafe Cino.
The Cino was a religion, a philosophy, a community, a school, a monastery, and it was building a culture.
In the late 1940s, Joe Cino left Buffalo for New York City's Greenwich Village. He dreamed of owning a coffee shop where friends could hang out and have poetry readings. After years of saving, the Cafe Cino opened at 31 Cornelia Street in 1958. The main attraction at first was the coffee and conversation. But once a tiny stage of loosely strung together milk crates was set in the room, burgeoning artists, many of them gay, began to flock to the cafe, and a one-of-a-kind theater was born.
The Cino was the first off-Broadway theater, and now people are calling it the first gay theater. And I think they're quite right in both cases.
The Cafe Cino was a place where people could come and be themselves and be comfortable with whatever the sexuality was.
Before the Cino, the gay characters we knew about were either villainous lesbians preying on girls in vampire movies, or silly hat designers and choreographers.
There was no gay movement at the time. We're talking, way before Stonewall.
For the first time ever, there was a place for writers and artists to battle these blatant stereotypes, spurred on by the cafe's openly gay and fiercely charismatic owner.
It was a fairyland atmosphere, and in the depths of the fairyland, behind the steaming coffee machine, was Joe Cino. What released us at the Cino was Joe.
How did Joe create that atmosphere? He was a free spirit.
For Joe, the doors were always open. Do your own thing, do what you have to do what you want to do.
Joe was the heart and soul of the cafe, encouraging anyone who entered its doors to let their creativity flow as freely as the coffee, whether they had ever thought of doing theater or not.
I've always said, if Joe ran a bowling alley, we all would have been champion bowlers. It happened that he ran a theater. So we wrote plays.
The incredible freedom of being able to be yourself in that place and outside that place and in your work.
Everybody who came there had been suppressing some part of themselves, some vital creative part of themselves, which they could express at the Cafe Cino.
You could just do anything. And it made me want to just experiment like crazy.
Joe was very liberal. It was just, you know, anything that you felt good about, you just said, come put it on.
I offered my script to Joe, and Joe said, what's your sign? And I said, I don't know. And he said, when you were born? I said, February 24th. He said, January 17th. I said, no, February 20th. I said, no, January 17th, that's when your show opens.
And he'd start each show by hitting the wind chimes and bells, and then announce the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Magic Time at the Cafe Cino.
The action of the play takes place in a part of paradise commonly called the Garden District. The time is after Adam's usual afternoon nap.
Lots of wonderful theater was created, you know, in between coffees and sandwich making.
What made the Cino new, what created off-Broadway, was its permanency. It wasn't just some kids hiring a loft one night to do an experimental show. Every bloody week of the year, you could come here and see experimental theater, which we were doing for free. We don't care if anybody pays to see it. We've got to write it and produce it. Joe Cino often said, play it for the walls if no one was there. I don't think I ever did better work.
Seminal works from the theater's next wave of playwrights, actors, and directors began pouring out of Cafe Cino and garnering both critical and popular attention.
John Guare and Sam Shepard.
Lanford Wilson with The Madness of Lady Bright.
Bob Dada, who did Dames at Sea.
A wonderful musical that introduced Bernadette Peters. Tom Ian. It took Tom 20 years to free himself of the seductive freedom of off-Broadway and write Dreamgirls.
What had begun as fun and experimentation for the mostly gay artists quickly grew into something more socially relevant.
Cafe Cino was different from other places for gay people in that, for one thing, in those days there weren't too many places that gay people could write for, honestly. Two, it wasn't doctrinaire. It isn't like it had any kind of agenda about being gay.
When I was acting in my first play, The Haunted Host, and we acted right among the tables, you know, and I leaned on the customer's table, and there was a young man sitting at the table with an older man and woman. And as I leaned there, he said, "You see him, Mom? You see him, Dad? That's why I brought you here. I wanted you to see him. I'm like him. I'm a homosexual."
We were, I think, somewhat aware that we were revolutionary.
You know, we were doing something that nobody else did, that nobody else could do, really, or could put up with.
But by the end of 1966, the success that the cafe had reached created a frenetic pace that was clearly taking its toll on Joe.
I think there was always a show up doing 2 shows or 3 shows a night, if you'd believe it. On a Friday and Saturday, it was 3 shows a night. The last one was 1 o'clock in the morning.
At the same time, the drug scene of the 60s encroached, and things began to fall apart.
People came in and brought speed, and people got very crazy and hooked and sick. People were getting physically and mentally ill.
The very wildness of the Cino was its undoing.
In January of 1967, Joe's longtime lover, Jonathan Torrey, died tragically, pushing Cino over the edge. On the morning of March 30th that year, Joe was found by a friend on the floor of the Cafe Cino, bleeding to death from drug-induced and self-inflicted wounds. He was rushed to the hospital.
He shouldn't have made it to the hospital. He lived for 3 or 4 days. There was a most amazing line to give blood.
When they told me on the phone that Joe was dead, I was suddenly up in the air watching myself.
A lot of people were completely and totally devastated and didn't come in the cafe again because the memories were just more than they could handle.
I think the heart of the place left when Joe Cino committed suicide.
Without Joe, the Cino continued on with the help of friends until 1968, when it fell victim to the fines from cabaret license laws that were now being more rigidly enforced on Greenwich Village coffee houses. But even after it closed its doors, the Cafe Cino's influence on theater was immense.
We're here at the Lincoln Center Research Library for the Performing Arts in New York City. In the Billy Rose collection, there's incredible documentation of the Cino years. It's Joe. These are the actual original posters that were in the cafe window. These were scripts. But this is part of the fabulous collection that's here. We can't recreate the past. The past is gone, but we can carry the traditions forward.
Pretend he's not there and he'll go away. This is Cino. And Joe used to live behind there.
I want to welcome you back to New York. I couldn't carry a bigger bundle.
Okay. And I also want to fly.
It was an experience that bonded us probably forever.
Are you up inside?
Good that they made
Good to see you. The wall back there for the kitchen is where the old counter used to be to make the cappuccino. It's amazing how it stayed with me. By 1974, I had a theater based on the Cino that was called Tassos that was doing new gay plays. And my whole life has been dedicated to that.
It's smaller. They built walls in.
And we're larger.
Because of the Cino, there were now 300 off-Broadway theaters.
The entire stage in the middle of this room was a bed at one time, a huge bed.
My play, A Good Night, I Love You, is staged in the loft up there and the loft up here, and the audience in between. Like ping pong game.
I had no idea that we were the beginning of independent theater in America, but we really were. Duh, who knew?
Of course, out of Joe Cino's work came the Cafe La Mama, and there came a point when I needed to create a theater, and we started Circle Rep, and we got to be, you know, kind of a off-Broadway institution.
If it wasn't for the Cino, the chain of events would not have happened that made it possible for In the Life. Harvey Fierstein, Quentin Crisp, Angels in America, Dream Girls, 5th of July, As Is, My Play Kennedy's Children, Hair. All of these things are the flower of the Cino.
I never would have been a playwright without the Cafe Cino. I never certainly would have written about gay subjects that freely. That was the kind of empowerment that the plays gave us. We were no longer victims.
Edmund White and Doric Wilson are powerful writers, critics, even old friends. We brought them together to discuss their firsthand accounts of the Stonewall Riots and how bearing witness to the uprising impacted their work and views of the LGBT experience.
You were active in the very beginning of gay theater.
Technically, the first modern gay plays were done at the Cafe Cino on Cornelia Street. Written by myself, Lanford Wilson, Robert Patrick. We never realized what we were doing was brave. Of my 4 Cino plays, 2 are gay plays, in so much that they were open gay characters. They don't discuss being gay.
Uh-huh.
That's not what the subject matter of the plays are.
Which play is that?
Pretty People. There's an out character in it that has no stereotypes. He just happens to be a very attractive young man and he's gay.
You might not have been surprised by it, but I think I was, that openly gay material is being
everybody
used.
was. We didn't think about it.
How did you decide to write about gay subject matter?
Actually, how did you?
Well, for me, I'm sure it was a lot more tormented than for you. I mean, I think in my case, I had actually written a gay novel in the 60s, which was pretty good. And it went to 25 publishers and it was turned down, oftentimes by editors who themselves were gay. and who years later told me, you know, I really liked that book of yours, but I didn't dare accept it because people would have known I was gay.
I don't know that gay liberation per se had any direct response to gay culture.
Oh, I think it did.
You do?
I think it absolutely did because, for instance, there were organizations that... See, I moved to Rome in 1970, and by the time I came back a year later, I was shocked by how different everything was, because it was very dramatic for me. And one of the things that was happening was the Gay Academic Union, which would have these meetings where people would say...
You're right. I think of the movement, I think of the activist movements.
Yeah, but there were these intellectual movements, and I remember being invited by student organizations to Princeton, to different gay organizations, student ones, that later died out. Gay liberation originally and first and foremost meant for us sexual liberation. It meant sexual opportunity, because what a lot of people forget is that there were it was very hard for gay and lesbian people to meet each other.
Yeah. I agree with you that it gave sexual freedom, but I also think it gave identity.
Absolutely.
Through education, education
and
programs.
The identity was of a minority group rather than of a sickness.
Yes, oh yeah.
After the World's Fair in '64 or so, the mayor was always closing gay bars.
He was closing before the World's Fair.
Because he wanted to clean the city up for the World's Fair. And the idea was that tourists would be appalled and disgusted if they saw any gay activity, little realizing that many people would come to New York for that. Maybe around '66 or '7, gay bars began to reopen, and then there were quite a few of them, and there were many more visible gay people on the street.
Yes, and more people were coming out.
Yeah.
I arrived in New York out. I've always been out. I came out in the 50s in a Wheat Ranch Town High School in Washington State.
But it was very rare.
I know.
Then, when all the bars began to reopen, everybody thought, oh, phew, that horrible period is over, and now we're going to be free. And so when the Stonewall was raided and closed, I think it really upset people because it seemed like a throwback to a slightly earlier era.
In that era, when bars were raided, they were never raided on the weekend. They were always raided on a slow night because the police and the bar owners had agreements.
It wasn't the police raid, it was the ATF who raided, because they'd found out that the police were in collusion with the mafia owners. I mean, of course, what's famous about Stonewall is that the customers resisted.
Actually what happened, all the customers got out on the sidewalk and the police were trapped inside, not knowing there was no back exit out of the store.
I was there.
Oh, I didn't know, sorry.
I was there. No, I was there because I just happened to be walking past.
Me too.
I wasn't actually in the bar, nor did I go to that bar very often. No. But I was walking past with a friend, and of course we were intrigued, and we stayed there. And I was so awful in middle class that I kept trying to get everybody to calm down. Oh, come on, guys. You know. But even in spite of myself, in spite of my awful bourgeois self-hatred, I found myself excited.
People weren't angry. First of all, there was astonishment that we were doing it.
And when we would say things like, slogans like gay is good, patterned after black is beautiful, it struck us as hilarious.
Yes, there was a great gleefulness about it.
But there was also a feeling that was preposterous because, after all, it was really at Stonewall, I think, that gay people first realized that they might be something like a minority group rather than a medical diagnosis. Because up till then, we were sick.
Yeah.
And there was always some point in the evening where we'd all say, oh, God, we're sick. And then...
some.
Yeah, right. And then, but
I never had a problem with it.
Well, you probably didn't, but everybody else did.
Well, not everybody else did. No. Kind of the world you lived in.
Yeah.
Most of the people I knew didn't.
I was in therapy for years and years trying to go straight. And all this, I was engaged twice. You know, the typical middle-class person suffering over the whole thing. And then the wonderful thing about Stonewall for jerks like me was that it was liberating.
Yes. The gay world was in the dark. One of the terms for it at the time was the twilight world. At twilight, gays came out from under their rocks or whatever.
Sure.
And with Stonewall, we started coming out in the daylight.
Not twilight people anymore.
Yeah, not twilight people anymore.
Yeah.
John Irving wrote you an open letter. And I think he mentions in it that the gay marriage phenomena going on at the moment revitalizes the movement.
Yes, I mean, John Irving lives in Vermont. He's a straight man, of course, the great writer of The World According to Garp and so many other wonderful books. And he was very active in campaigning for it in Vermont. And it does look as if that is the current big issue. I mean, for people like me who never liked marriage and also didn't like the idea that gay people should be assimilated to the mainstream community, that's now a lost cause, and I've given up on it. And what I now see is that the marriage issue goes right to where people live. I mean, it's all right to say, yes, you gay people can have job security, and yes, you gay people can produce your musicals or whatever. But when you want to get married, it feels like one of the central institutions of our society, and especially when you want to adopt children or have children of your own.
It's funny, we don't change, you and I, bottom line. I don't think we do.
No, I guess not. Well, we're still here, and it's really been great to see you again.
Yes, indeed.
In 1968, Mark Crowley's play, The Boys in the Band, swept both gay and straight theater audiences alike. This controversial work was adapted by Crowley into a 1970s film directed by William Friedkin. Now, in 2009, Crayton Robey's documentary, Making the Boys, examines this seminal work and its place in gay history.
My inspiration for Making the Boys was just, I just look around today and I see that we have all these freedoms, and I feel that people don't really connect the dots. I think that the older generation and the younger generation really don't relate to each other. And I think a lot of that happened because of the AIDS epidemic. Our history is not taught in schools, and I just feel like our legacy should be preserved.
I don't know what Boys in the Band is. That's just what a bad gay, when you're like, what's a bad gay? Bad gay.
I haven't really heard of the Boys in the Band, so I know that's very embarrassing, but I'm this boy in this band, but I don't know otherwise.
The Boys in the Band is a play that was written by Mark Crowley in 1968.
It was tried out, in a workshop, and then it was very cautiously moved off Broadway, and nobody knew whether it was going to work there or not.
Within a year, it had opened nationally and internationally. And this is all before Stonewall happened, which is so amazing. And what this piece of work did, because it was reviewed in the papers, it created a dialogue about homosexuality. Within that same year, he was approached by a couple different studios, and it was made into a major feature film.
I heard about Boys in the Band when I was probably in my early teens, so I was too young to actually go and see it. But it had caused quite a scandal as an out gay film. This was the life I couldn't even dream about at this point, because though I knew I was gay, I didn't know there was a future for me.
At that particular time, you go see the play, but then you go out for a drink that night and you could be arrested.
There was a period in American history not so long ago, some of us were alive, when gay people were virtually invisible.
In the 60s, gays were evil, they were nasty, they were twisted and psychotic, or they were pathetic. There was no middle ground.
I didn't know what I was going to write about, but, what does one write about? One writes about what one knows, and that's one's life.
What The Boys in the Band does, it just documents that moment in history and that group of people that assembled at that birthday party and that were just dealing with their demons or not.
When I thought I had to do something and I started to work on the play, it was just reaching for a legal pad out of my briefcase and, beginning to scribble some notes on a yellow legal pad. And day by day, they kept growing and the pile got thicker and thicker.
From a historical perspective, we have to say that it was the most significant and the most important gay play in terms of just advancing our causes because of the visibility that it gave us. People had their own personal experiences with the piece. Seeing these gay images of themselves was so important. But I think it's also overshadowed by the movement that had started, the gay liberation movement, where people they could not really like these particular characters because they had to celebrate their freedom.
There were a lot of future gay activists sitting in the audience who were being imbued with the idea that this is something that we should be open about and proud of. You know, I say in the Gay Metropolis that the last speech, which most people thought was very self-hating.
But you'll always be homosexual as well. Always, Michael. Always. Until the day you die.
And in fact, that was a very liberating statement because that was finally an acknowledgement that this condition was not a choice or something that you could get over. This was who you were.
I like to call it a classic. I mean, it's something that we have as a culture, and it came around at a moment and just rescued us in a very, very special way.
Thank you for watching In the Life. To learn more about the issues in tonight's stories and how they affect you, visit our website at inthelifetv.org. You can also watch extended interviews, sign up for monthly airdate alerts, and download past episodes 24/7. I'm Michael Billy. Thanks for tuning in, and please join us next month.
Where were you in the June of '69? Did you sing a song of Suzanne, Sweet Caroline? Did you walk on the moon or were both feet on the ground? Were you Woodstock bound? Those were the days when the bars became our home, 'cause we had no church or state to call our home.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation, Arcus Foundation, New Paul Foundation, the estate of Richard W. Weiland, and by the annual support of In the Life members like you.